세계 곳곳에서 한국인을 사칭한 범죄가 급증하고 있습니다. 지난 9일 주 상파울루 대한민국 총영사관에는 브라질에서 SNS로 한류 스타 행세를 하며 브라질 여성들을 속이고 돈을 뜯어낸 사례가 제보됐습니다. 상파울루주 히베이렁 프레토에 거주하는 안젤라는 자신을 평소 한국 드라마와 한류에 푹 빠져있는 여성이라고 소개했습니다. 안젤라는 최근 SNS를 하던 중 자신을 박보검이라고 소개하는 프로필이 적힌 계정을 알게 됐고 계정 주인과 메시지를 주고받으며 지냈습니다. 그러던 중 안젤라는 자신을 보러 오겠다는 그와 브라질에서 만나기로 약속하게 됐고 그는 안젤라에게 소속사한테 브라질 갈 때 쓸 경비 사용을 허락받으려면 복잡한 절차를 거쳐야 한다. 내가 항공료와 필요한 경비를 먼저 송금해주면 나중에 만나서 정산해주겠다며 돈을 요구해왔습니다. 안젤라는 박보검이라고 믿었던 그의 제의에 아무런 의심 없이 오만해야 할 한화로 약 1,350만 원의 돈을 보냈습니다. 하지만 모든 것은 현지 브라질인이 한국 연예인을 사칭해버린 사기 행각이었습니다. 더군다나 안젤라가 송금한 돈의 상당액은 주위로부터 빌린 돈이어서 더 안타까운 상황인데요. 현재 브라질 경찰은 한국 연예인으로 속여 사기 행각을 벌인 이 남성의 뒤를 쫓고 있습니다. 하지만 문제는 한국인을 사칭한 사기가 한두 건이 아니라는 것입니다. 실제로 최근 영사관에는 같은 방식의 피해 신고가 6, 7건 추가로 들어왔는데요. 이런 사건은 연예인을 사칭하는 것뿐만 아니라 현지 여성들이 한국인을 좋아하는 것을 노려 평범한 한국인, 한국 남자라며 접근하는 경우도 많다는 것입니다. 다행히도 안젤라 외의 다른 사람들은 대화 도중 돈을 요구하는 것에 이상함을 감지하고 실제 돈을 보내지는 않았는데요. 상파울루 총영사관은 한류 스타든 한국인이든 SNS에서 만나 절대로 금전을 요구하지 않는다며 의심이 들면 경찰에 신고하거나 대사관이나 총영사관에 연락 주시기 바란다고 포르투갈어 안내문을 만들어 배포 중이라고 말했습니다. 해당 여성이 제대로 알아보지 않고 판단해 사기를 당한 안타까운 사연이지만 일각에서는 이제 해외에서 한국인이라는 브랜드 자체를 신뢰한다는 의미의 반증이라는 분석도 나오고 있습니다. 이처럼 전 세계에서 한국과 한국 문화는 동경의 대상이자 특별한 의미가 됐죠. 이와 관련해 지난 9일 미국 공영방송 NPR은 한국 문화가 어떻게 세계를 점령했는가라는 제목의 다큐멘터리를 제작해 방송했는데요. NPR은 특히 한국이 근대사에서 겪어야만 했던 수많은 굴곡에도 불구하고 어떻게 문화를 꽃 피우고 세계화를 시켰는가에 중점을 두어 분석합니다. 그래서 일제강점기부터 오징어 게임까지 45분에 걸쳐 방대한 이야기를 다루고 있습니다. 우리에겐 그냥 생활의 한 부분인 우리 문화를 제대로 알기 위해 다른 나라에서 이렇게까지 연구하고 분석한다는 것이 흥미롭게 느껴지는데요. 해당 다큐멘터리 요약본을 번역해 공유합니다.
Every step of the way, there were sort of doubters and skeptics. Initially, they're like, well, Korean culture will be popular in Asia, but it would never be popular outside of this.
The country's pop culture exports have taken the world by storm, becoming a major contributor to South Korea's $1.6 trillion economy.
Now, Koreans themselves have become almost a kind of export, or even if they're not leaving, they become popular to people in other countries.
Korean pop culture has now become a really legitimized cultural force that rivals the US. How did they do it?
How did they do it?
How did Korean culture go global and take not just the world by surprise, but also Koreans themselves?
It's a national humiliation. I feel so ashamed.
That's Kim Bang-so, a South Korean street vendor in Seoul, speaking with the New York Times. The year is 1997, and a financial crisis has rocked Asia.
All of a sudden, there's no more liquidity in the global markets.
In a matter of months, companies go bankrupt, banks close, and people see their savings and investments vanish.
Well, it's not a large amount, but 50 million won is big money for us.
Korea turned to the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, for help. That didn't sit right with many South Koreans. Some felt like their country was being colonized all over again.
Even if the IMF is an international organization, everybody knows it's run by the US, and the US is using it for its own interests.
The IMF ultimately granted South Korea a nearly $60 billion bailout on a day many call National Humiliation Day. In some ways, the country found itself where it was at the end of the Korean War, feeling beholden, but compelled to rise again. And Koreans took it upon themselves to pay the loan back, contributing in whatever way they could.
Tens of thousands of our fellow citizens have taken jewelry and other items out of their drawers to donate or sell to banks and civic and media organizations. Koreans can unite to rise to the occasion in aid of their troubled nation.
Cannot survive layoffs.
Korea had to change once again. A few months after the economy crashed, South Korea elected a new president, Kim Dae-jung, and he was a little different than past leaders.
So he has this kind of colorful history of being in jail, human rights and democracy activist, right?
The son of a farmer, the second of 7 children, Kim Dae-jung was from the Cholla region, where the Gwangju massacre happened. No stranger to hardship, he was determined to charter South Korea into a new future. Remember those K-dramas without sound? Well, Kim Dae-jung saw how popular they were becoming around Asia, and he had a light bulb moment.
He's kind of like, okay, now we're going to be a soft power.
The Korean wave had already been swelling. All the government had to do was harness it. So Kim Dae-jung went all in. He passed laws that established the government as what was called an entrepreneurial state. It became the government's responsibility to develop, finance, and promote cultural industries from film to TV to music. This included everything from building concert arenas to regulating karaoke bars.
By the 2000s, this idea of Korean soft power, that Koreans can actually find a place in the world, not through the hard military economic power, but through cultural influences, that actually captures the imagination of a lot of Koreans.
And the investment in Korean K-drama, movies, music, beauty products, and food began to pay off in South Korea and way beyond it. Coming up, Korean culture goes global.
You'd have tourists come from all over Asia to Seoul in order to shop. Not just to shop, but to see what the Korean women are wearing and what cosmetics they're using, because that kind of sets the standards for all of Asia. Gangnam is very much sort of the mecca of high consumption.
Gangnam Style took the world by storm.
It is really getting a lot of reaction in the US, isn't it, Janet?
It was a classic example of K-pop. Catchy chorus, booming bass, a candy-coated, highly produced music video full of absurd outfits and bright colors.
It's the video to watch, and I have to admit I've watched it probably about 15 times.
It did what no other Korean pop song had done. It broke into the US's notoriously exclusive music market.
Normally I say these are my people, but today it's side people! If you know the words, say it! What? Gangnam Style.
Squid Game and Parasite were the center of a cultural firestorm in the US. For the first time, American audiences were watching Korean faces on screen and seeing themselves. We were looking at something made across the world to understand the fears and problems that plague us at home.
Many Americans watching didn't speak Korean. They didn't understand the cultural references. They watched with their phones out, Googling things like how much was 45.6 billion won in US dollars? How many people live in basement apartments? And did kids actually play that cookie-breaking game? But despite all these cultural incongruencies, American audiences were hooked, mesmerized by what they saw on screen.
I think one way to understand why Korean cultural products are so popular and so successful is that in many ways, they're not so Korean. So with Korean music, you have a kind of a combination of all these elements from around the world packaged as Korean song. And I think it's because Korea, whether the Koreans wanted it or not, was sort of forced to be open to all these outside cultural influences. They're then able to master different segments of it and then repackage it as a Korean version.
That's Wonjo at work. Koreans drawing from global cultural influences, but not just mimicking them, owning, reworking, and embodying them, becoming the source, the wellspring of culture, and being on the same level as the very best in the world. Which brings us back to where we started, because no K-pop group has become more emblematic of that than BTS, the best-selling artist in Korean history. BTS debuted in 2013. Since then, they've taken over the world.
It's just been non-stop for you. You won 3 American Music Awards.
So here we are in 2022. 2 decades ago, President Kim Dae-jung bet that there was a global market for Korean culture, and that bet has paid off. Korean cultural exports like movies and music generated over $11.6 billion last year. The era of U.S. total dominance over the global cultural landscape is starting to fade.
We see again Korean culture, pop culture, and economics becoming a competitor with the U.S.
And when the scales started to tip, that's when this fear emerges. Fear of what a shift in power could mean for the U.S.
The uptick in anti-Asian violence and this kind of simultaneous, obsession with South Korean culture, I think are definitely related. South Korea, vis-a-vis, I think its pop culture industry now occupies a kind of space that allows for young people in the US and around the world, right, to sort of place their aspirational desires onto South Koreanness. But that can exist alongside a sort of condemnation of Asia as invading, our culture or becoming too much of a competition.
There's this push and pull between the US and Asia. In the US, we're coming to terms with the fact that we've got competition. We don't hold the singular spotlight on the world's cultural stage anymore.
여러분의 소중한 의견을 남겨주세요. 바쁘시더라도 구독과 좋아요 부탁드립니다. 지금까지 단골이시였습니다. 시청해주셔서 감사합니다.